Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're installing a 5-channel amplifier on this 2024 Ford F150. Now in this install we're going to show you how to integrate this amplifier and subwoofer to the factory audio sound system. Let's get started. This video is sponsored by Alpha Epoxy, your professional epoxy coating service provider, installing quality coatings for home, garage, and commercial spaces. They did a fantastic job for my new shop, and they can do the same for you. Located in Salt Lake City, Utah, give them a call to schedule your quote today. Now, before we jump into things, couple of things to note. This specific video covers the F-150 that are equipped without the B&O factory audio sound system. If you have an amplifier, the factory amp that's behind the rear driver's side seat, you're going to have to use our other video, which we can link in the description. So without further ado, let's head to the bench, show you the parts that we're going to need for our install. All right, so we're at the bench. Now the parts that we're going with first and foremost is the amp and sub combo that the customer wants us to install. Now they've opted for this NVX 5-channel amplifier, which we already have out here on the bench. It's the VAD11005. Not pictured here is the sub and box combo. That's already installed within the vehicle, and the customers opted for a higher end sub and box that actually fit behind the seat versus underneath it. There's a ton of sub and box combos that go up underneath the seat, and we can link various different options in the description. Now there are other sub and box configurations, whether you're looking for 212s, 210s, a single 10, a single 12, ported box, sealed box, or even if you want to go out and do 4/8 forward firing, we can link those various options in the description. In order for us to integrate this audio sound system into the factory radio, there's a couple of parts that we need. Now, depending on how much you want to spend, you can go something nice like this AudioControl LC7i. What makes the LC7i unique is that it not only is a line out converter, but it's a line driver. It has signal bass correction for any sort of bass roll-off called AccuBass, and it has built-in load resistors. It's going to provide all our outputs for our amplifier. Now this is a higher end unit, right? So there's other alternatives, and we can link those in the description. If you're not going with an LC7i and you're going with a more basic pack line out converter like a 4-channel, you're gonna need load resistors. F-150s, especially for 2015 and up, the factory radio does require some sort of load on the radio amplifier itself in order for it to function correctly. If you don't add a load, oftentimes you may find that the radio will distort, you'll hear pops, the radio won't turn on, it'll turn off randomly, you're going to have issues with it. So you're going to need load resistors if your line out converter doesn't have them built in. Next here we have an amplifier wiring kit. We're going with a 4-gauge oxygen-free copper kit. This is a very budget-friendly Skar OFC wiring kit that'll work great with the NVX amplifier. And finally, for that factory integration piece outside of our line-out converter, we're going with this Pack Audio LPH FD31T harness. This is going to allow us to make this 100% plug and play, so we don't have to cut any wiring whatsoever. This essentially connects the radio back behind the radio on the non-factory amplified Ford vehicles, where we can pull the signal from our radio, send it to our LC7i and amplifier here, and then that amplified signal goes back up to this harness, which will essentially power all our speakers easily. To carry that signal to and from our amplifier, we're going with some 9-conductor cable. This is OFC 18-gauge. This will support generally up to about 100 watts RMS at the most, and we're going to need about 40 feet of these. We're going to have 20 feet run that'll take the signal from the radio to the line-out converter, and then the speaker outputs, not counting the sub output, but the speaker outputs go through another set of 9-wire all the way back up to our T harness, and that'll send that amplified signal to all our door and dash speakers. Now the last thing we haven't talked about is the amp mount that we're going with. Now this is the 1087 design amp mount. This one is actually a little bit more unique than the ones typically found within their website, because the customer actually reached out and had them custom make one. He ordered the full size one, but they cut it down because he's doing a behind the seat custom sub box. This is on Sounds Good Stereo's website. It's not an affiliated link for us, but we love them so much we use these all the time. We can certainly link one of these in the description. Now we do lastly have a couple of set of RCA cables here because we don't need long ones. Our output from our line converters there just goes simply to the input here on the amplifier. They can be nice and short. So that's it. That's a lot of stuff that we have to talk about here at the bench. Everything that's going to make this really click well. What we need to do is start wiring this up. We also need to start preparing our 9-conductor cable and our T-harness that'll carry the signal to and from our speakers. Now let's talk a little bit more about our LC7i here. This LC7i is unique because it can actually take multiple channels of input. For our factory radio, it only puts out 4 channels, so it's only going to populate the first 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of channels. It won't do channel set number 3. The nice thing is about the LC7i, we'll feed these channels in, but it still can populate all 6 channels of output through signal summing. So this 3rd channel output, also controlled by Accubase, generally used for a sub output. This will do our signal correction, being also a line driver, and then we're going to use signal sum, so it's going to sum in the other channels to populate this one so we don't have to run any sort of jumper to this side. Our LC7i also does require power and ground, and we can rob those off the terminal of our amplifier. We won't have a remote input because we want this to generate a remote output. This is going to generate that turn on, so as soon as it senses DC offset or signal over the factory speakers, it's going to generate an output to turn our amplifier on for us. Now you'll notice, like mentioned before, this is also unique because it has that load generator built into all these channels. You can set it between 20 ohms all the way up to 20,000 ohms. The LC7i Pro also comes with a bass knob, so we'll use that instead of the bass knob included with our NVX. These RCA outputs will go to the amplifier signal inputs through use of these nice short RCA cables. On the amplifier here, we have a few terminals as well. We have power and ground. Now power has to run all the way up to the battery up underneath the hood. Ground, there's a factory ground. With F150s, that is a common topic that we always talk about. Because it's an aluminum body, there are some individuals that say you need to run a ground all the way to the battery, and that never hurts. Other individuals say, well, aluminum conducts electricity better than steel does. Well, that's true too. So it depends, and I'll leave that up to you how you want to run your ground. There is a factory ground location that we're going to go to that's essentially up right by this amplifier mount area towards the upper bolt. We're not going to run a ground all the way forward unless we absolutely have an issue and need to. In most cases, for all the installs we've done on F150s, we've been fine without it. But if your audio system is having issues with grounding or voltage or anything like that, it's probably in your best interest to run a ground all the way up to your battery. Here's our speaker outputs and our sub output as well. These will go through the 9-conductor cable through that harness all the way up to the T-harness back behind the radio, and our sub output simply goes to the sub box. Here's a remote turn on input right there in the center, and that's going to be generated, remember, by our LC7i. That'll go in there and that'll turn this amp on. So what we're going to do at this point in time, we're going to grab 2 runs of our 9-conductor cable. We're going to start hooking up our terminals here, our inputs and our outputs, and then after that we'll start preparing our power and ground. Alright, and just like that, our amplifier rack is assembled. We'll still review all our connections on our equipment here so you can replicate something like that at home. Now if you want any tips and techniques to assemble an amplifier rack, we have some great content on the channel that kind of walks you through the process. We'll show you how we've routed our wiring here and got everything nice and tidy. This took us a couple of hours today, which is why obviously I didn't want to necessarily show that all within this video. Remember, we have 2 runs of 9-conductor cable. One's an input and one's an output. On the input side, from the factory radio, it comes up here, goes into the input side of our LC7i. Now this LC7i has our front input and a rear input. Remember, we're not going to populate this 3rd channel. We're going to tell this internally to bridge and pull that signal from these channels in order to output something for the subwoofer. Our LC7i needs an input, which we've provided from the factory radio. Again, we don't need those external load resistors because it has those built in. Now, our LC7i also needs power and ground. Couple of ways to get that. You can snag power and ground and rob them off the terminals of your amplifier, where actually there's 2 extra connectors within our 9-wire that are not being used. On the input side, we're running our ground, which is that extra blue, and on the output side, we're running our power wire, which is going to be constant 12 volt. Now it's lower amperage, right? So it's not going to necessarily provide any sort of ground loop or issue in our signal. It's just we're utilizing wire already found within this 9-conductor cable in order for us to effectively power our LC7i. It'll draw that power from the radio power from that T-harness, which we'll show you in detail here further in just a moment. And then we have a remote output. It goes down the remote input of our amplifier. Now, as that signal goes in, we've added ferrules here. We're going to go ahead and process that signal. The RCA output goes through down these into the input of our amplifier. We had some extra RCA cable length here, so we just tucked that back behind the panel. So through those RCAs, we have our front, our rear, and our sub down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Our LC7i also has a bass knob. It goes out here. We have a cable here, and this will go up kind of by the steering column there. We'll flush mount that knob in a nice, convenient location. Also on the left-hand side of our amplifier, we have our power and our ground. It's going to go towards the passenger side. Ground, there's a factory ground location about right here. Like all our connections here, we've added wire ferrules and even wire ferrules on our power and ground, added Provo Beast heat shrink. Lastly here, we have our sub output wire. This will go to the sub box, comes from the sub terminals, being a 5-channel amplifier. This is nice. It's going to do everything for us all in one platform. So that's really it. Those are all our connections here. The only thing we need to show you now is how to set up our 9-conductor speaker wire for inputs and our outputs with our T-harness. So let's do that next. So let's go ahead and talk about the way that we're going to connect everything to our factory radio. Now remember, we have our 2 sets of 9-conductor cable. We cut ours down to about 16 feet, seem to be the right length, 2 runs of 16 feet wire. And we got them labeled as input and output. Remember, input is the signal from the radio that goes into the LC7i. The output is from our NVX amplifier that we're going to send to all our door and dash speakers. So we have our inputs and our outputs, and these will connect at the factory radio. This is where this PAC T-harness comes into play. This is the PAC LPH FD31. As we get this pulled apart here, what PAC provides is that specific T-harness, right? So this goes between the radio and the factory harness. You unplug the factory harness from the radio, you plug that harness into ours, then ours will connect back to the radio itself. What this allows you is a breakout harness where essentially you have access to all your speaker wire, your fronts and your rears, as well as power and ground. This power and ground is going to power LC7i, and we're going to rechannel our inputs and our outputs by disconnecting these little pigtails. The end with the male end, the end that plugs into the OEM radio, that's our signal side, right? So all this is going to go to the LC7i. This is our output side, the female end that connects into the harness of the vehicle. That is where we're going to send all our amplified audio to all our speakers. Now in this package, PAC also provides those pigtail connections, right? So essentially we'll connect those in here and have quick, easy 4-pin disconnects for the harness when we go to install this. It also includes a power harness. Now you'll notice our power harness, we don't have a red in here. It's because there's no accessory analog turn on at the radio. It's done digitally. So we're not going to hook up this red wire. It actually doesn't go in anything. So we'll just cut this out, but we will use power and ground. Now it also provides a sub-only harness, which we showed in our sub-only install video. If you want to see that and how we use this harness, we'll link that video in the description. In our case, in this install, it's not going to be used. We got our inputs here in the side that says signal 2 amp or amp rack, and our power and ground, as well as our outputs associated with our output side. So we're going to solder our connections. Okay, so we finished soldering up our connections. Again, this is going to be our input side, and we're repurposing our remote turn-on wire as a ground. So that's the input that goes to the LC7i Pro. And then here's our output side. This is from the amplifier. This will go to all our speakers also indicated by output. And we're repurposing this remote turn on wire here, this blue wire in this bundle, as our power. So now at this point, we're going to go ahead and pull our heat shrink up and over those connections. We'll shrink them down with a heat gun. All right, so we finished our T-harness here. We went ahead and loomed everything with some high temperature tested tape just to give it a little more protection in the dash. Got our connections made. Remember, our input side is the male end that plugs into the radio, and our output side is the female end that plugs into the OEM harness. We got everything connected. Everything is nice and loomed here. We're done with our amplifier rack. We're done with our T-harness. We are ready to move this entire thing over to the vehicle and do some final assembly. All right, so we went ahead and got our amp rack all installed there. We got the lower included bolt with the rack in, as well as the included upper bolt. So that snags the factory bolt location there. We actually added our own bolt just to give it a little bit more structure there. So we did a threaded insert there for a 10mm. So all in all, we have 3 points of contact. It's nice and sturdy. It looks fantastic here. Now we pulled our power wire and our sub output wire to our JL sub here. That's already installed there. We did custom brackets. It's all in there nice and snug. But the power wire goes behind the box, and over there, we got to run it on the passenger side, where on the driver's side, we have our inputs and our outputs, as well as our bass knob from the LC7i. That needs to go up underneath these panels, working your way all the way forward towards the radio cavity. So what we're going to do is start popping these panels. We'll fish our wire under these panels, through the B pillar, underneath the panels up front. We'll do the same technique to pull our power wire on the passenger side, because that will need to go through the firewall to the battery. So let's start pulling panels. All right, so we've pulled our wire all the way along here. We pulled out this kick panel. This is just held in with clips. This little side panel, we pop that out of the way. Now there's somewhat of a passage that goes through, but before we pass the wire underneath the steering column, we got to open up the top of the radio cavity. Now in my amp and sub video, I do talk a little bit more about how to disassemble this a little bit more, in case you want to totally pull the screen out. In all reality, you don't really need to. You can save a couple of steps. We can pop this upper panel off and get to the OEM radio module, because it is separate from the screen. So what we're gonna do is get you back on the tripod here on the other side of the truck. We're gonna pop this top off, pull the factory radio, and we're gonna make our connections. We'll grab our T-harness and get everything buttoned up at the radio. All right, so we're back here in the truck now in preparation to pull our wire through the dash to connect it to the radio module. It's up here. So it should be just an open tray. Now you may or may not have a little rubber mat. If you do, go ahead and pull that out of the way. There's 2 screws initially here at the top, held in with 7mm. We're gonna go ahead and remove those. All right, so once you pull those 2 screws, the rest of the panel is just held in with clips. It's all about just finding the leverage to pull it out without scratching or breaking the panel. Piece out just barely. We had 2 of the clips fall out, so we're going to put those back into the panel before we reassemble it, but our panel is out of the way. Once that's out of the way, you're going to see there's a bar or bracket over the top to expose the radio, and then underneath that the radio is going to have 4 7mm bolts. So remove the bracket. All right, with those 4 screws removed, we have our bracket. That's all out. Let's pull that out of the way. And now the radio itself has 4 screws itself as well. All right, so here's a radio module. Now the only harness that we're worried about is the black harness here. That's where the T-harness is going to connect. So we're going to grab our T-harness end. Let's go ahead and get that plugged in now. Unplug ours. Just like that. Ours plugs right in its place. Just like that. Then we plug our harness into the OEM one. Clicks into place just like that. Now we have our pigtail ends ready to go. It's all back in. Now, before we button this up, we got to pull our wire into this cavity to get everything connected. So we fished our wire up here. Goes up and over steering column. We found a little passageway up in there. And that little, it just comes right up on there. Pulled our wire out. Made our connections at our T-harness. And at this point in time, that's it. With our T-harness connected, we get the radio back in. We're gonna go ahead and get our screws back in here. Get everything zip tied, cleaned up at the radio, and then we can reassemble the center console. Now we went ahead and pulled our power wire along the passenger side, just the same exact technique as the driver's side, through those convenient channels. Now at this point in time, we need to go up through the firewall so we can connect into the battery up underneath the hood. All right, so up under the hood, here's our battery. It's on the passenger side front corner. Back there is the grommet that we're gonna pass our wire through. Now, the stud that we're gonna connect to is this stud. This other stud is your tightening post. You don't wanna do that. All our accessories are gonna go on this one here. Now, in terms of passing our wire through the grommet, now my recommendation is go ahead and pull out your fuse box cover. It's gonna give you a little bit more access back there, but this nipple here, you can go ahead and cut off. It's gonna expose a hole in the grommet. Now we're gonna use that wire hanger to fish our power wire through this grommet. This is probably the hardest part of the install, is pulling that wire through. Now alternatively, you could drill a hole, but you gotta be so careful. You don't wanna drill into any electrical devices. So we're gonna use the rubber grommet and the nipple provided by the manufacturer to pull our own wire through. So what we're gonna do is cut that nipple off. Then we're gonna go inside, fish our wire through into the engine bay here. We're gonna put our fuse and fuse holder as close to the battery post as possible. Then we'll make our connection at the battery. All right, so we fished our hanger through that hole. Now there is a thin piece of rubber on the other side that you just need to pierce through. Then we fed our wire down and it just popped down right there. Super easy. So we pulled this on out. We pulled off these panels just to give us a little more space. Now we taped our wire to our hanger there, to our fish. Now we're gonna lube this up with a ton of soap and water on both sides. Lots and lots of soap and water. We want this as slippery as possible. So we're gonna get this all coated nicely, and then we're gonna go ahead, pull it on through. With the wire pulled through, we went ahead and made a fuse and fuse holder mount. I just had a piece of ABS plastic, a little L bend there. Snag that 10mm bolt, it's nice and secure. And we ran that all the way to the positive post of the battery. Now, we made all our connections with the negative off. We want to be nice and safe here. Got all our split loom added, and it's nice and serviceable, but up and out of the way. You can still open the fuse holder box. So, really, that's it. Besides putting the negative back on the battery, let's go ahead and do the ground of the amplifier. Once the ground is done, we can come back up here, put our negative back on. All right, here is our factory ground. Now we're gonna do a little better there. We're gonna clean up the paint, everything there. We want the best connectivity possible, especially if we're not gonna be running a dedicated ground to the battery here in this truck. So what we're gonna do is pull that 8mm off. We're gonna clean really well up underneath it with a wire brush. We got our wire brush here on our drill attachment. Then we're gonna add our negative, which is just hanging out right here. All right, cleaned it up super well. We're gonna go ahead and grab our new ground, add it to the existing ground, get it all bolted back up. All right, got that all done. It's looking great. At this point in time, we can put the negative back on the battery. All right, so with the negative done for the amplifier, we came back up here, got everything hooked up, put the negative back on the battery. While we're at it, we also added another ground for our battery as well, with some extra 4 gauge that was left over from our wiring kit. in and done, we went ahead and set up our gains and our tuning and Acubase and everything with our distortion detector. We also got everything set up on the amplifier as well, and essentially this thing sounds fantastic. A ton more power. I love the way it turns out. Super crisp and clean. And everything's back behind the seat. So again, you don't lose any space up underneath the seat. This is a pretty small box. There's not a lot of air volume, so you're not going to get a ton of output for this type of subwoofer. However, if this is a solution, we can link this box in the description along with a ton of other solutions in the description at your convenience. So with this all in, the radio all assembled, everything cleaned up, ready to go, we are done with this install. We also did front door speakers, rear door speakers. We have videos on a ton of different versions of this truck. We can also link that information in the description. If you liked what you saw, be sure to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. We post great content on the channel all the time. We'll see you in the next video.